I'd like to welcome everyone. I guess it's our first webinar in hemlock woolly adelgid, best practices in nursery. I'd like to also send my appreciation to Hannah and Cassie for putting so much time and expertise into getting us this information on hemlock woolly adelgid. So I'll ask Hannah and Cassie to introduce themselves before they start presenting. And I would just introduce myself as Jamie Aalbers with the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association. I work as grower and research specialist for the CNLA, and yeah, this is just one of the newest pests in our ever ongoing battle with pests and diseases in nursery production. So appreciate you taking the time to join us, and I'd like to hand the screen over now to Hannah, and she'll get us started.
Thank you for the introduction, Jamie. It's great that everybody has come to attend today's webinar. I'm Hannah Fraser. I'm the entomologist for horticulture crops with the Ontario Ministry of Ag, Food and Agribusiness, and I'm based out of the Guelph office. So as Jamie's also indicated, today's webinar is dedicated to HWA, which I hope is on everyone's radar because it is present and it is spreading in Ontario. If you are growing hemlocks or if you love hemlocks, then it's really, really important for you to be paying attention to today's seminar. It is a regulated pest. We are expecting with additional fines this year in 2025. That's the CFIA is going to be expanding the regulated areas, especially in the Greater Toronto area. So thank you. So Cassie is going to be covering management in the nursery, and Jamie is going to be providing you with an outline of the CFIA directive. And I'm going to be providing you with a backgrounder, including the origin, the host, the spread, plant health impacts to hemlock, the known distribution in Ontario, the biology and identification, which is really, really important from the standpoint of being able to identify the pest, but also to understand its life cycle when you are applying management tools to help control it. And of course, I'm going to end up with talking about recognizing the signs and symptoms in the landscape as well as in the nursery. So adelgids are a family of insects. They're a small family of insects with about 65 species described worldwide. They're sometimes described as conifer aphids, but adelgids have piercing, sucking mouthparts just like aphids, but there are some big differences between these two families. So adelgids lack the cornicles, which we sometimes refer to as tailpipes, that are found near the tip of the abdomen in aphids. And most life stages are covered with a woolly wax, which protects from the elements, predation, and can make control with topicals like oil harder to achieve. More significantly, in contrast with aphids, adelgids only lay eggs regardless of the sexual or asexual reproductive phase that they're in. They have a set number of generations per year and very restricted hosts. Aphids feed on plant phloem, resulting in pretty superficial injury, but HWA have very long, flexible stylets. They're piercing, sucking mouthparts that can probe deep within the plants to reach water and nutrient storage cells in the xylem. Salivary compounds injected by HWA also induce abnormal growth that further compromises tree function. So there really are a true plant health risk, especially under high population pressure. So where did this pest come from? Well, this map shows the distribution of hemlock species globally. There are several lineages of HWA, and each is adapted to the local species of hemlock. In its native ranges, HWA is kept at low population levels by natural enemies and host plant resistance. The population on the west coast of North America, in BC, for example, is an ancient lineage that's been there for over 20,000 years, so it's not a recent introduction. Hemlocks on the west coast are adapted to HWA, and of course, there are natural enemies that will help to keep numbers lower. The HWA lineage that was introduced to eastern North America originated from a population in southern Japan that specializes on Japanese hemlock and tiger-tail spruce. All the species of hemlock are vulnerable to attack, but severe damage and death typically only occurs in eastern and Carolina hemlocks that we have on the East Coast. Hemlocks in eastern North America are especially vulnerable because the introduced lineage tends to attack new shoots in contrast to the western lineage, which tends to focus on the older twigs. So, how did it get here to the East Coast? Well, the evidence suggests that it was on infested nursery stock from Japan. It only takes one adelgid to start a new infestation. That is because they can reproduce asexually. Since it was discovered in 1951, HWA now occupies over half the hemlock range in eastern North America, and eradication efforts have not been successful. Animals are involved in the local movement over distance. Transfer by birds is actually quite high, especially during peak crawler emergence in the spring, which coincides with bird migration. Humans are also responsible for long distance spread by moving infested nursery stock, logs, firewood, or contaminated gear. And just a reminder that the host that we have here in Eastern North America is the hemlock. So this is an important slide of the known distribution in Canada. You're probably going to see it more than once during this webinar. But as you can see, the regulated areas are highlighted in yellow. This is from the CFIA website. So British Columbia, the entire province is highlighted, and you can see from Nova Scotia that a significant portion of that province is also under regulation. And that's an interesting case because this insect was first identified there less than 10 years ago, and during that time, it's now managed to cause significant hemlock decline in mortality in over 85,000 hectares of forest in that province. Pretty significant and pretty fast. So this is a map of the known distribution in Ontario. So again, you can see those counties that are highlighted in yellow. Those are regulated areas. And you can also see those red spots that are also regulated spots where there's been detections in 2025. And we would expect that the CFIA will probably expand the regulated areas around those spots to the county level in the coming months or year. So please keep up to date about where that's actually occurring. Make sure to check their map fairly regularly. So what about hemlock? Why are we worried? What's at stake? Well, if you look at the map on the left-hand side, you'll see the distribution of hemlock in Ontario, and you can see some areas where it's really, really abundant and areas where less so. So those areas that are red, that means that they represent a pretty important portion of the canopy in those forest systems. HWA poses a threat to hemlock stands and the forests they occupy really across Ontario. Hemlocks are considered a foundational species in the forests they occupy. So although they're pretty rare in southern Ontario, they do represent a significant part of the forest canopy in those central parts of the province. Hemlocks are beautiful, they're large, they're long-lived, they're shade-tolerant plants. And in forests, they play a really important role in mediating soil temperature, stabilizing stream base flow and temperature, which is important for aquatic invertebrates that in turn feed things like birds. And they also are important in nitrogen cycling, slowing the decomposition of acidic organic litter, and providing habitat for animals. So it's not surprising that their loss will have pretty significant ecological consequences. This is why people are working so hard to find solutions. While hemlocks occur in mixed forests, there's no really replacement species that fills the void when hemlocks are lost to HWA. So HWA is a threat not only to hemlock themselves, but also to the whole forest ecosystems that they're part of. And then, of course, there's the economic and social aspects to consider, property values, management costs associated with dealing with dead and dying trees or trying to protect specimen trees. There's losses to the forest products industry and as well cultural value. I mean, they are big, beautiful, long-lived trees, and there's some really important indigenous connections. So this is what can happen to hemlocks when they die. They turn into these kind of characteristic gray ghosts, and you can see them sticking up from the forest canopy. So they look this way because adelgids feed on the needle's source of water and nutrients, leading to the needles to dry and to fall off. So that feeding also prevents new apical buds from forming, which then halts that new growth entirely. So also the deep feeding of adelgids causes quite a severe and systemic reaction. They inject a saliva, and that prolonged feeding that they have leads to desiccation, discoloration, loss of needles, that loss of new growth, and dieback. And so you can get complete death of the tree because what happens is the tree's storage tissues are compromised and they basically starve. And that can occur over a course of just a few years, although the timeline really varies a lot by kind of what's happening locally to, with the population and the hemlocks themselves. So just need to go over a little bit on the biology of this insect. The life cycle is pretty complex, especially in its native Japan. In Japan, the life cycle takes 2 years to complete, and it includes migration between between Japanese hemlock and tiger tail spruce. There's two generations on hemlock, both of which reproduce asexually, and three on spruce, involving sexual and asexual reproduction and the formation of galls. Pretty cool. The second asexual generation that's happening on hemlock down low, they actually produce both winged and wingless females. The wingless females are going to stay on the hemlock, but the winged ones, they fly off to spruce. But that's really not representative of what we have here in North America because we don't have tiger tail spruce, perhaps as some landscape ornamentals here and there. So the life cycle gets truncated to just having asexual reproduction on hemlock. So there are two generations per year here in North America that are occurring on hemlock. There's a lot of really neat slides out there that show the life cycle, but I really like this one here because it's linear and I think it's fairly simple. You'll notice that the insects that are shown there, they're the different little eggs and the crawlers and the adults. They've all had the wax removed from them just so you can actually see what they look like. So I kind of like that, and I like the timeline that they provide. So there are these two generations per year, and we refer to these with different names. We call them cysteines and progrediens. The cysteines are the overwintering generation, and they take longer to go from an egg to an adult. They hatch in the early summer, so maybe June, July. It varies a little bit by location. And the crawlers, which are the first instar nymphs, settle at the base of the needles on new shoots, where they become immobile, and then they go dormant until the fall. The reason because this is they don't like really hot temperatures. Cysteines actually means standing still, and that's represented by that dormancy period that you can see on the graph. The development resumes in the fall when it starts to cool off and it continues all through the winter. By early spring, the adults are present and they lay their eggs. These eggs then hatch in the spring, so that sort of March, April period, to become these progrediens. The progrediens crawlers settle near the ovisacs they emerge from and they start feeding right away. They don't go through that dormant period. They develop a lot faster than cysteines. So by early summer, they've completed their development to become new egg-laying adults. That progrediens means moving forward loosely. And I like to think of this as kind of moving forward really fast in their development to beat the summer heat. And then some of those progrediens adults are going to be winged. They're going to fly off and not find the spruce that they want. And the others are wingless and they stay on hemlock. And that cycle just continues on that way. So now we need to kind of look to see what this thing actually looks like. I know there's been some cool pictures so far, but you need some practical information for looking in the nursery and looking in the landscape as well. And probably the ovisacs are the most obvious life form of this insect. The ovisacs are white cotton-like masses, and they contain the mature female and her eggs. And there can be hundreds of eggs in each ovisac. So when you look at that picture on the left-hand side and you look at how many ovisacs, just think about how many individuals are actually there, potentially going to emerge and start feeding on that hemlock. Those ovisacs are found on the underside of hemlock branches near the base of the needles. And again, they're the most visible and reliable sign of an HWA infestation, especially from the late fall through the spring when they're most prominent. The wool around the hemlock woolly adelgid is a white waxy material that the insect secretes from pores on its body, and the material serves several purposes, including protection from environmental conditions like desiccation, as well as protection from predation. Those little eggs are pretty small. They're about 0.4 millimeters in size. You can see them. There's that reddish color. And then off to the left of those eggs, you can kind of see the body of the egg-laying female that's in there. Now that wool is pretty sticky. It can get picked up by passing animals, and that can result in the movement of eggs. These eggs, again, have the potential to establish HWA in new areas. So these are the crawlers. These are crawlers that have come out of an egg mass, just to show you the detail of what they actually look like. These are the only mobile life stage of this insect. So all of these crawlers, they're females. They're going to turn into egg-laying females themselves. So their goal is basically to find a good spot to settle down where they can eat in peace. And once settled, they are not going to be moving again. I like this slide because it does, again, show the scale. So newly hatched adelgids are highly mobile. They're really quick to colonize. You can see them in contrast with this yellow flagging tape just to show the scale. Note that they have really long stylets. So when you look at that picture on the right-hand side, that is a crawler as well as its mouth parts. Now, again, those stylets, they get inserted into the underside of the needle's base near the twig. And once inside, that stylet is going to travel down to where the tree stores its carbohydrates and other nutrients. It's pretty impressive structure. And just another quick slide to show you perspective. So, I mean, these things are smaller than poppy seeds. Here they are on a beading sheet. That's actually can be a really useful tool for finding pests like that. You put a beading sheet under a branch and you tap it. Might be something that you consider adopting, but you can see how small they are relative to that American penny. So those crawlers, they come out of their ovisacs and they've settled. So here's a picture of a crawler on the left-hand side that's just settled at the base of the new growth needles. It's probably not actively feeding. And that's because when they do start actively feeding, you start to see a discernible ring of white wax that surrounds the settled nymph. And it looks somewhat kind of like a black sesame seed with white around the edge of it. And then the image on the right shows a third instar nymph with a cast skin from a previous molt, as well as that woolly wax. And you would need a hand lens for sure to see these early stages. These are the adult forms, again, with the wax removed from them, just so that you can actually see the insect. They are quite small, as you can see, but that wool is pretty distinct from the late fall to early summer. It's like within that ovisac. And the image on the right is of a winged female. Remember that those are formed on hemlock and they fly away to look for tiger tail spruce. They don't find it. So basically it's a dead end for that insect. They don't get to reproduce. We had a chance to visit the Hamilton area this past winter to get an idea of what this insect actually looked like. And we were reminded of how important it is not to be a vector yourself. So we were told things like, you know, it's really important to make sure that you wipe all of your equipment, your pruning shears, your any other tools with an ethanol-based cleaner or a bleach solution. We had brushes that we would use that were dipped in a solution that we had to use on our footwear. We were given lint rollers to roll on our clothing just to pick up any life stage that might be there, and reminded we should wash our clothes, all of our gear before we go to another forest, and certainly avoid moving branches, needles, and firewood. And these are always good recommendations, and we will pass them on along to you as well here. So just coming on to the end of my presentation, this is an insect that you know, it's easy to scout for once you know it's there and you know that infestation levels have reached high levels, but it is really easy to miss it in the early stages unless you're really using a systematic approach that involves visual surveys and sampling of the canopy material. There aren't any pheromones for this insect, no baited traps that we can use. But what you can do is you can look for those ovisacs on branches, so those tiny white woolly sacs that are there. They're most obvious kind of late in the season, early in the season. And you can also look for decline in the crown health. So lack of new spring foliage, needle loss or thinning branches, that gray kind of foliage that I showed you with those gray ghosts, dead twigs or dieback. You can also look at drop branches to see if there's any ovisacs on those as well. There are some really interesting techniques that are used in forest systems. Again, they do use a really systematic approach and sequential sampling, but there have been some community science projects that have involved trapping debris underneath hemlocks, and that goes in for eDNA analysis. There's other traps that do similar things. And then there are these Velcro balls that can be shot up into the canopy of hemlock. And the idea here is that the Velcro attaches to the ovisacs, and then you can take a look at those. But these are not going to be particularly useful for us in a nursery situation. Cassie's going to be going over management in the nursery. I think it's important, especially as we're learning with this pest, that we include scouting for it all the time, regardless of where you are, whether if you're producing in an area where this pest is known to occur or not. You should be looking for ovisacs at least once in the late fall and again in the winter, early spring, focusing on new growth, new shoots, maybe those the 30-centimeter branch tips. Make sure to turn them over because you're looking for ovisacs, as well as crawlers. You're going to need a hand lens to check for settled nymphs near the base of those needles. And I would consider using a beat cloth because they are fairly easy to use for small trees. You might even consider, I guess, uses of lint rollers. Be creative here. And of course, if you are finding suspects, you need to be contacting the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, especially if you are located in areas where this pest is not known to occur. So with that, I am going to end my presentation and I will hand things over to Cassie.
I just wanted to say thank you to Hannah for covering off such a great kind of basics on the biology life cycle monitoring. I just want to reinforce that importance that Hannah mentioned as well in terms of hemlock being such an important keystone species in our environment. That's why it is a regulated pest here in Canada and why you're required to report it if you see it. And that's why we have this directive in place that Jamie's going to cover in a little bit more detail later on. We just want to make sure we as a nursery sector are not contributing to that long distance spread of this pest. So, on that note, I'm going to cover a little bit on the integrated pest management of hemlock woolly adelgid. And before we get too deep into management, just that general reminder, IPM is not just management. We have to keep in mind that whole IPM cycle. It includes the knowledge and the prevention, monitoring, evaluation as well. For management specifically, though, we should be thinking about all four types of these management or management types, sorry, when addressing a pest. So, firstly, physical management, which can include things like pruning, netting, or other ways of physical removal of a pest from a host. Of which for hemlock woolly adelgid, really challenging, if not impossible, due to its incredibly small size. Cultural control is another form of management. It could be things like adjusting planting dates or planting resistant varieties. In the case of nursery stock, not really any currently viable cultural practices that we can really implement for management of HWA. Next, we have biological control. So that's, of course, using some sort of biotic organism like other insects, viruses, bacteria, etc., to target a specific pest. These biological controls are usually very host specific, and they can take a while to evaluate, especially if it's in the realm of introducing a new predator for an invasive species. So I will just really briefly mention that there is some work being done on biological control happening both in the US and Canada. However, we're not really going to cover that today. It's still some time away. There's still lots of research to be done to evaluate options, optimize rearing techniques, etc. So it's just not something we can rely on in an agricultural setting right now for a regulated pest where we have zero tolerance. So that's why we're going to kind of skip over that today. So that obviously brings us to our last form of management, chemical. So when we can't rely on these other forms of management techniques, we go to chemical. And with invasive and regulated pests, we tend to rely quite heavily on chemical controls, kind of jump right to it. It's just the reality of where we're at. Most of the times, those chemistries are the fastest path forward. And we as a sector, we have to rely on these chemical interventions to sometimes appease phytosanitary requirements when we're shipping plants, again, due to that kind of zero tolerance piece. So let's dive in, talk about what's registered here in Canada for control of hemlock woolly adelgid. Hopefully everyone here is familiar with this Health Canada label, pesticide label search. This is where all the most up-to-date labels will be housed. So if you go to this tool and you search hemlock woolly adelgid and you spell it correctly, because the search on that one is a little bit finicky sometimes, there's actually a number of listings that come up. So one might look at this and say, well, we do have some options here for control, but the unfortunate reality is that a lot of these options actually have restrictions associated with their use, especially when we look at using them in the nursery or for smaller trees. I wanted to dive into the 6 different products that come up from that search. I've created a bit of a summary table here that outlines the product, the use site, so where it's legal to use it, and how it's applied, as well as some other notes I thought were important to capture there. So before I go any further, this is just a rough summary. There's other details from the labels that won't be included in here. So the label is the law, not this table. So make sure you're always checking the label first. So first on our list here is landscape oil. You can see I've highlighted it in green there under use site because that is registered to be used in nurseries for field and container nursery stock, and it's a foliar spray. I'm going to dive in and talk about landscape oil in a few slides, so we'll sit tight on that one. Skipping ahead just to a couple of the other products. So the next ones there on that list, you'll notice I've highlighted Confidor and Imajet. I've highlighted them in green because they do have labels that specify it can be used on nursery stock or in a nursery setting. But as you can see, the application column for these two products, as well as Trazen, these are all injectable products, most of which require a measurement, so DBH or diameter at breast height. And they have this kind of minimum DBH to help calculate rates. And a lot of hemlock nursery stock that we grow just might not reach that point. In addition, of course, tree injections are just not really used in nursery stock. The injection systems themselves can be incredibly expensive. It takes a lot of time to inject a single tree, so it's just not a feasible solution for treating large amounts of nursery stock. Now, the last two on this list here are Zytec and Starkle, both of which got registration in Canada via emergency uses for hemlock woolly adelgid. Zytec is a imidacloprid. It's a neonic. It does take some time to translocate through the vascular tissue of the trees, but it provides longer-term systemic control. Starkle, on the other hand, it's a bit different. It is a neonic as well. The active is dinotefuran, and that acts a bit more quickly for a faster knockdown. So a combination of these two chemicals is actually what's very commonly used in the States, from my understanding, and it's been approved here in Canada for use in mature trees and woodlots under some restricted licenses. So you'll notice both of these. They are basal bark sprays, so they're intended again for those large mature trees where an applicator can spray the bark, so kind of starting from the root flare up to about a meter and a half or so high on the bark. So when we look at this kind of list of products, really the ones I've outlined here in red are pretty much not economical or legal to use in a nursery setting for management of hemlock woolly adelgid. And if we really need some photos to drive this home, just to understand the differences of when we're managing large trees versus nursery stock, on the left here we have a mature hemlock. This is down at the RBG from that tour Hannah mentioned. It's a great example of a tree that they're doing injections on. They could also very easily do some basal bark applications to a tree of that size. In contrast, we have nursery stock, and I just want to give Lauren a shout out for these awesome pictures. So we have an example of some small potted hemlocks. Obviously, we can't measure the DBH on something like that. The far right, another example of a larger tree in the nursery, but even with it being that large, it's still not quite meeting some of those minimum DBH values to do an injection or to calculate rates. So, and in terms of basal bark, I'm just really not sure how that would work. So essentially for nursery, we really need foliarly sprayed products or drenches, which we don't currently have. Now, this webinar is focused on information for IPM in nurseries, but I just want to put this slide up very briefly to mention there are a lot of resources out there for HWA management in woodlots, landscapes, and mature forests. Specifically, in the Invasive Species Center has published this management guide. The Ontario Woodlot Association is also finishing up a practical guidebook for management in woodlots. And what I thought was really important here before we continue talking about management is even with all these management techniques that they have registered in the landscape, including those injections and those basal bark treatments, there's still and I realized I have a photo here of someone doing a basal bark application. What's really important here is that they're really only targeting with these applications kind of high risk or valuable trees with the goal of what I've heard called lifeboating stands. It's just not possible to treat every tree or save every tree from this pest. So really they're trying to focus on kind of maintaining some genetic diversity of the hemlock populations where they can. And utilizing these sorts of treatments to kind of slow the spread so that we have some time for the research on biological control to catch up, because that's essentially going to be long-term, what a possible long-term solution would be. So looking back at our table of products, it's clear nursery stock really only has that one viable option currently in terms of a sprayable product that's registered on nursery, and that's landscape oil. Before I get it talking into landscape oil, I wanted to clarify one little point of confusion. I mentioned this product Starkle earlier, and I've had a number of questions around it. So, specifically around the label language that's used, where it says other treat areas on the label. We've spoken to PMRA and the registrant. This other treat areas does not include nursery stock. You can't use this on nursery stock. In addition to that, this product specifically requires a specific exterminator license. Most pesticide applicators at farms are going to just have that grower's pesticide safety certification. So that's something entirely different. So, in short, no, you cannot, as a nursery, buy and use Starkle currently. So, what we do have is a foliar spray for nursery hemlock trees, and that is landscape oil. We've got the pesticide registration number up there if you want to type that into the Health Canada label search. This is, excuse me, this is 99% mineral oil. It's registered, as I mentioned, for container and field-grown hemlocks. Now, there are a couple different rates on the label. So a 20 liter per 1,000 liters of water, or a 2% solution intended for when trees are in dormancy or when there are woolly stages present. And we need that high rate to try and penetrate that wax and some other life stages protected inside. And then we have a 1% solution rate also on the label. That's intended as a summer or in-season spray application, targeting the nymphs, especially those instar crawlers, first instar crawlers that Hannah mentioned, as they're going to be the most susceptible to an application. Now, there are some guidelines you need to follow in terms of using oils. Now, most of this is taken straight off the label. Oil works, of course, as I mentioned, by smothering the insects. So there's no residual, there's no repellent effect or systemic effects. So it's only going to work if the pest is there and if you use a high volume of water to ensure you're covering all the foliage. They recommend a 2-week interval between sprays and not to exceed 4 consecutive sprays. It's also not recommended to apply to wet foliage or prior to rain or irrigation. Obviously, that makes sense. We don't want it being washed off. It's not going to do its job. And ideally, we're using this after new foliage has hardened off to limit the possibility of causing some phytotoxicity to new tender foliage. On the topic of phytotoxicity, from just some conversations I've been having, I understand oil isn't really commonly used in the nursery on ornamentals. So I wanted to highlight some things we do need to be mindful of when using this as a pest control tool. So firstly, the use of oils around extreme temperatures. Most of the labels will have this kind of warning on them. They shouldn't be used prior to a freezing temperatures. That, of course, can make a timing of some of those dormant applications really tricky. It's also not recommended to apply oils in high heat. So I believe the landscape oil label says 32 degrees Celsius. Some other mineral oil products that I looked up have 26 degrees Celsius as a recommendation. So, it's all mineral oil. I personally, if it was me and I didn't have much confidence with the product, I'd probably opt to follow that 26-degree guideline just to start. Oil also shouldn't be applied to stress trees. That's a pretty blanket statement, but essentially crop tolerance just hasn't been assessed in all varying conditions and on various varieties. And lastly, I think this is probably one that a lot of folks might not know about. Oil shouldn't be tank mixed or used around certain other pesticides or sprays. Specifically, should not be mixing it with sulfur or copper fungicides or any other group M fungicides, so Daconil and Bravo or Captan and Fulpan. In other crops like apples and grapes, they are starting to much more commonly use summer oil applications, and most of those crops are recommending a 10 to 14 day buffer between oil and a group M or a multi-site fungicide. It's a little bit of a different crop, but we don't have experience in this crop, so we need to kind of start so and start to build up our confidence and our knowledge in using these oils around other products. The last thing that I did find too, while this isn't on the landscape oil label, again, there was some mentions of some specific insecticides that don't work with oils on some of the other mineral oil products we have registered in Canada. So some warnings around using them around the insecticides Permup, Pounce, Lagon, Saigon, and Sevin. We have oil. We have oil as a pest control tool for hemlock woolly adelgid registered here in Canada. Now, in my last couple of slides here, I'm going to talk about HWA management in the context of what's required from growers to follow this new directive. Sorry, I shouldn't say new, the directive that is recently applied to a number of folks in the regulated area. So essentially, what treatment is required for growers that want to ship out of that yellow area to areas that aren't regulated. And again, if you're not in this yellow area and you haven't experienced this, but maybe you're near some of these red dots, it'd be really great to make sure you're listening up. We don't always get a significant heads up when regulated areas change. So start understanding now what those requirements are so that you're not caught off guard. So hopefully if you're on this webinar, you're familiar at least with the current regulations surrounding the movement of nursery stock to prevent the spread of HWA. This is Directive D0705, which Jamie's going to talk about a little bit more later. I've got the QR code there if you want to do some light bedtime reading to help you fall asleep. It's been around for a number of years, this directive. It's just new to us in Ontario since we do have those recently expanded regulated areas and nurseries that are now having to follow requirements. I did just want to highlight one part of this directive. It's referenced here in Appendix 3 about treating plant material with a pesticide. So essentially, to meet these phytosanitary requirements, you need to do a spray of a registered product within 7 days of shipping the product out of that yellow shaded regulated area. So essentially, to meet these phytosanitary requirements, growers are going to have to spray according to a shipping schedule, not necessarily when the pest is observed or when they're at their most vulnerable life stage. So I've already been asked this a few times about these two different rates on the label and when to use each. And this question is honestly really tricky, especially as we actually haven't observed HWA and nursery stock to really inform the decisions of rates, nor to really properly validate the life cycle on when we use those different rates. So based on what's been observed in the landscape and in mature trees and in the US, we're going to kind of use this calendar here as a guide for now until we know more. Ultimately, if the trees are dormant, you can use that higher rate. Obviously, again, too, if you see woolly covered stages, that's when you're going to use that higher rate, the 2% rate. But if it's an in-season application and you're not seeing life stages, this 1% rate should be fine. It's less likely to cause phytotoxicity issues when used correctly. I've highlighted in blue on the calendar there where I think that 1% rate can be used versus when a higher rate might be needed in green. But you can't just follow this blindly. Obviously, you need to keep in mind those temperature thresholds we talked about and high temps and low temps and freezing. Spraying oils in June to August just might not be wise altogether because it's so hot. So that's kind of the last thing about these phytosanitary requirements for spraying oils within 7 days of a shipment. There's likely going to be some growing pains this coming shipping season. You may have to do a treatment when it's not a great time to target the pest or simply have a difficult time finding a proper window to do the spray. Either that might be due to the growth stage of the tree or the weather, or, you might have some stressed trees. So there might be periods where it's just maybe not wise to spray or ship hemlock. As we work to figure this out, this new norm, there will likely be lots of questions. I might not have the answers. There's going to be some degree of learning from our mistakes as we adjust to using oils. So I do have an ask for any of you who are going to be using them to ship out of a regulated area. Please share your experience on what's working. If you do have a slip up or anything, it's really helpful to know so we can learn from our mistakes. This means also maybe you tag some trees and spray, especially like dug or potted hemlock. At different rates or different times, and keep an eye on them, make some observations. Otherwise, it's just going to be a lot of spraying the trees before they go out the door, and then we never see them again, and we don't really know if it's having adverse plant health effects. So really encourage you to kind of keep an eye and do some spray testing, and please keep me informed as well. So with that, just put up my contact information there for any of those of you who haven't reached out to me yet, as well as Hannah's contact information. And I will hand over the rest of the webinar to Jamie.
Thanks, Cassie and Hannah. You both are truly the subject matter experts on hemlock woolly adelgid, and I just want to express our appreciation for all that you provide to the nursery sector in terms of support and help with the various pest issues and among the other items that you support us with. So thank you for that. I'm going to just share my screen for a second. I'm going to talk more about the regulatory environment around hemlock woolly adelgid in Canada. This map you've seen already, of course, but just to show that it's just not in Ontario. There are other regulated areas in the country, and I think it's important to know that there are, of course, other regulated areas, 27 states in the United States that are infested as well. So that's important to know if you are importing from the US. CFIA also has phytosanitary requirements for any hemlock coming into Canada from the US due to this as well. I will just now touch on the domestic movement of hemlock as it relates to the directive 0705. So this is a fairly old directive. '07 is the year it was developed in 2007, and a lot has changed since then. So there are definitely some need to have this directive reviewed and revised, but it is what we're dealing with at the moment, and they are the regulations that we have to adhere to as nursery growers in regulated areas. So if you are a grower in these areas and you want to ship to other parts of Canada, you do require a phytosanitary certificate with the additional declaration that the material described herein has been treated with an insecticide to kill hemlock woolly adelgid. And for any of you who were shipping in in the fall, that's probably that would have been the additional declaration that you received from CFIA after applying the oil sprays 7 days prior to shipping. Or and I just wanted to talk about the second option. There is another alternative, and that is to have that additional declaration based on the material described herein was produced, harvested from an approved block registered under the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid Nursery Program and is free of hemlock woolly adelgid. That's a program I don't expect anyone is on yet. There just wasn't time to get onto that when the expanded infested area was announced in August. But it is something you may want to consider moving forward until we can get some changes made to how hemlock woolly adelgid is managed at the nursery level. In the directive on Appendix 3, there is an application form for nurseries to apply to the nursery program. The details are there. I'll just go over them briefly, but you do need to apply to join this program, and you need to apply to CFIA by January 15th of each year. So that's coming up quickly, but you just need to contact your local CFIA office to do that. And you register the blocks where you're growing hemlock on the farm. You're not registering the whole farm. And then you go through a systems approach basically in managing hemlock woolly adelgid throughout the year on the farm. And you need to train staff on how to identify and who they report to when they find if they have any sightings, who on the farm they report it to. There's scouting. You have to monitor every other week between March and October. And if it is detected, pesticide would need to be applied to treat for HWA. You'd have to maintain scouting and pesticide application records. And you're still kind of stuck though with the 7-day pre-shipping spray. That still needs to be done within the nursery program. And then you shipping, receiving, and all other records must be kept for 2 years. So that's more of a systems approach. What would happen is CFIA would audit your program more so than do in-depth phytosanitary inspections at time of shipping. So you may be able to respond to an order a little more quickly if you're on a program like this. So it's something to consider, and I'd certainly welcome input from any growers who want to give it a try, or if you want to work with. I'd be happy to work with growers who are thinking of doing this as well. Still the same, it's the grower's responsibility to ensure that only registered products are used and applied in accordance with label requirements. And Cassie's gone over what those requirements are and our limited availability of any other products than oil to use to meet the requirements of this directive. We do hope for successive improvement. Pulled that from Cassie's slide, but at CNLA, we are doing some work to try to improve the situation. It's going to take some time, but I have reached out to CFIA to ask for them to revise the directive to bring it up to date and to offer some better alternatives for nursery growers, because we are expecting the regulated area to increase. So there will be more growers caught up in these regulations as we move into the future. I think there needs to be an alternative to the 7-day pre-shipment pesticide treatments. They're meeting the need of a phytosanitary requirement, but they do have the potential to not be effective depending on when they're applied, and there may not be an active pest population or a life cycle that will be impacted by it. But it also can lead to an overuse of a product if shipping over 6 or 7 weeks. And you're looking at 6 or 7 applications already within one shipping period. So I think there's alternatives that we can look at, such as systems approaches, similar to the nursery, the HWA nursery program, but make some improvements to it. Perhaps even developing a pest module within our Clean Plant program or with CFIA, similar to ones that are available for box tree moth, spotted lantern fly, and strawberry blossom weevil. But a key part, of course, is that we do need more pest control products labeled for HWA in Canada on outdoor ornamentals, and that is a process we need to initiate and work through at CNLA. So we have initiated the process. We are looking at other alternative products such as Altus, Contos, Intercept have been recommended, but that whole regulatory process of getting a label expansion is a time-consuming one. So we will continue our work there, and I do want to say thanks to Cassie for all the support she's given CNLA and LO on that topic itself. So anyway, we are working on it. It's going to take some time, and I wish I could say shipping will be easier than it was this past fall, but I don't expect that we'll see all these changes occur before the spring, but have patience. We will continue to work at them. So anyway, I'll end there, and I'll have my contact information here if anybody would like to reach out to me on hemlock woolly adelgid, and even if you have other suggestions on how to improve how we manage it at the nursery level, I'd be more than welcome to hear from you and to speak with you about that. So at that, I will stop sharing my screen. We'll start looking at some of the questions that have popped up.
There's a question in the chat about product in the product comparison chart. Zytac did not have a use site defined. What does that mean? Do we know where it can be used and or not used? So this is a really great question. Thanks for asking. I wrote NS because it's not really specified on the label. However, there's so it first off, it is a basal bark application, so you need a certain diameter at breast height to be able to calculate the rate you need. In addition, like I said, these basal bark products are intended for trees that have like a big long trunk that you can spray, not the kinds of nursery stock. So I don't have a very clear, like absolutely no for nursery from that company. I haven't gotten that confirmation yet, but I was told that the intention was likely again for this registration was not for nursery use. It was for those large mature trees. The other thing to be mindful of is so Zytec is imidacloprid. Imidacloprid it does take some time to translocate through the tree. So even if you were using it as a 7-day pre-shipment spray, it might not have all kind of been sucked up at that point. It does take some time to have efficacy, so it's just not really a tool that aligns with that 7-day pre-shipment spray requirement as well. Yeah, and maybe I'll jump to the next question too. So the next question, are there specific products registered for HWA or all mineral oils? That's a really great question. So right now there's only one mineral oil product that's called landscape oil, and I included on the slide that registration number. That's the only one that actually has hemlock woolly adelgid on the label. So that is the one you should be using in terms of that phytosanitary requirement and using a product that is labeled and registered. That said, if there are issues with availability, we can have a chat about, what there might be other comparisons to other products that are the same active ingredient.
Thanks, Cassie. I think I can answer the first part of the next question, and then I'll hand it over. But the question is, do we only need to be on the HWA program if in a regulated area? Yes. Yeah, if you want to ship out of the regulated area, you don't necessarily need to be on the nursery, hemlock woolly adelgid nursery program. You can still just request a phytosanitary certificate at time of shipping from CFIA, and they'll do their inspection and ensure you've done your spray. And you can still get that movement certificate that way. The program itself just may be an easier way to manage it if you have multiple shipping windows throughout the year. So it's just an alternative. If you're not in the regulated area, there is no need to be on the program at this time. But just be aware of it. If the regulated area expands to where you are, then you will be. And I think that the second part is how effective are TAP tests to see settled life stages.
It's a good question. So the reason that I suggested that is that in working with other pests that can be dislodged, and obviously time of year is really important, it is another tool that you would have at your disposal. I have not found anything related to HWA on it. I pass it on as something you might add to your scouting program, because if you look for how to scout for in the nursery, it does involve, obviously looking for obvious ovisacs, which are easy to see, and using a hand lens to look at branches for any, small nymphs that might have settled. And that's hard. We also don't know, how many trees do you need to look at in the nursery to have, a level of confidence that, it's not there. So I would love to see more recommendations for how to scout properly in a nursery, and I haven't seen it. So I bring you ideas for tools that you might consider using just based on what I've seen and done in other crops and for other pests. Tapping trays can be really, really useful. It's basically a white sheet of some kind that you put under a branch and you literally tap it. And it's only going to be effective when you have individuals that can be dislodged. If they're settled, you may not get them. But that picture that I had with the penny was from a bead sheet. So it's a non-answer. But it's a suggestion for you. I think it's something that should be considered or could be considered.
And definitely points to how new this pest is to nursery
It is.
production and how much how much we still need to learn. So thank you, Hannah. Yeah.
Sure.
And the next question is, what is the likelihood that this directive will be revised in any way by the next growing season? I wouldn't put any hope in that by the next growing season. It does take time for directives to be revised. CFIA first has to do the science review behind and finding new revisions, and then there is generally a consultation period with the public and stakeholders. So I wish I could say yes, but my experience is that this will take at least a year before we see any changes to the directive, if CFIA is willing to make them. So I guess the other point of that is then this coming season, expect the same as we saw in the fall, where if you are shipping out of the regulated area, you will need phytosanitary certificates indicating that the hemlock have been treated with a pesticide within the last 7 days. Okay, I think that's all our questions. I can certainly um, see if any others pop in, but we are at our hour, so actually we stayed on time, which is good. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We have recorded this, so we'll post it to the CNLA YouTube channel at some point in the next little while. And I see Dave marked that already in the chat as well. So anyway, again, appreciate your time, and especially Cassie and Hannah for your expertise and presentations on what we need to know about hemlock woolly adelgid in the nursery. And yeah, you've got our contact information. So if you have any questions along the way, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll do the best we can to respond. Um, with that, I will let you go and enjoy. Hopefully, you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And it's not snowing too hard where you are. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, everyone.